the reef, the fisherman, the pet owner, and of course, the fish. These fish have only begun a journey that will take weeks to complete and will end halfway round the globe. A good day of collecting may bring the diver $3, but just one of his catch can easily bring more than $100 in an American aquarium store. Surprisingly, 3 out of every 4 tropical marine fish sold in the U.S. come from the Philippines. Although selling fish collected with cyanide is illegal, the buyer has only the seller's word about how the fish were captured. Many fish sustain permanent damage during the poisoning and can die suddenly with no warning. However, in the fall of 1987, the Aquino government joined with the pet industry and the World Wildlife Fund to offer an alternative. The International Marine Life Alliance, a non-profit organization, trains Filipino collectors in hand netting techniques that are as efficient as cyanide, but with none of the harmful side effects. Healthy reefs produce so many fish that those that are collected can be quickly replaced in their communities. Today, aquarium stores like this one are making an effort to stock their tanks with healthy fish from the Philippines.
Nice fish you got there.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Have a good day.
Tropical fish are not the only creatures taken from the reef for their exotic appeal. These are banded sea snakes, one of 15 species resident in the Philippines. Sea snakes are the most poisonous animals on Earth. Some have venom 10 times more potent than a cobra's. Still, the demand for their skins sends divers into the water after them. They're not very aggressive, but sea snake bites have been fatal. The divers hunt barehanded, so a deft technique is essential. Sea snakes have few predators, but man has proven himself a formidable foe. They have been gathered in such high numbers that the divers can no longer meet the demand. In some places, hunting pressure has been so severe that in just 5 years, the catch has declined to 1/10 of its former size. 3 species have already become extinct locally. Salting the skins helps preserve them and keeps them from becoming brittle. After salting and hours of drying, the skins have faded. Dyed into a gaudy rainbow of colors, they're destined for the world of high fashion. It takes the skins of 7 snakes to make 1 pair of shoes and a matching handbag. Some of these items will cost more than a diver earns in a year, but the real cost of the shoes is the loss of the snakes on the reef. Today, the international demand for shells is also at an all-time high, but their beauty has always fascinated people. Since before recorded history, they've been used as money, ornaments, and objects of art. It takes as many as 5,000 shells to make just one of these hangings. But if properly controlled, the shell trade need not be destructive. Shellfish produce far more young than will ever find a place to live on the reef, and gathering shells at low tide is often the only way that women and children can contribute to the family's cash income. However, repeated trampling by the gleaners does have an impact on the more fragile members of the reef community, including the coral itself. Offshore, battalions of young divers hunt through the coral heads for valuable shellfish. It's labor-intensive work, but because labor is cheap here and because the reef has not yet been overfished, the Philippines has become the major supplier to the world of all kinds of shell curios. Whether you buy your shell souvenir in Florida, Hawaii, the Caribbean, or Bar Harbor, Maine, the chances are it came from the Philippines. In deeper water, baited nets are set out on the reef and then pulled up days later to reveal their catch of shellfish. Some of these will be taken for food. Many are gathered for their commercial value. But today, the fishermen must travel farther from shore each time in order to fill their nets. The number of shells gathered by all methods is rising sharply every year. A much more serious assault on the reef is the taking of the coral itself. Although its collection has been banned since 1977 and its import is therefore illegal in the U.S., enforcement has been abysmal. The United States accounts for more than half of the market in Philippine coral. The shell trade is completely unregulated, and it could threaten some of the larger, longer-lived species. This Triton shell is popular with tourists, but its value as a dust collector on someone's shelf is surely outweighed by its value as a living defender of the reef. The Triton is a large marine snail, but it's no gentle grazer on algae. Instead, it's a dangerous predator on other slow-moving animals, including the arch-villain of the reef. The crown-of-thorns starfish, crawling in on its tube feet, protected by its poisonous thorns. Voracious consumers of stony corals, they can turn a coral garden into a graveyard of bleached skeletons. The Triton is one of the few natural checks on their population. When the Triton discovers a crown of thorns, it stretches its proboscis, arching it over the starfish to grasp it. A mouth armed with rasping teeth takes hold of the raised fleshy thorns on the starfish's arm. Once it has a firm grip with its mouth, it uses its powerful muscular foot to bring its heavy shell down on top of the starfish, pinning it. The crown of thorns has no defense. It retreats, but loses a leg in the process. The Triton's protection of the coral is unintentional. All it's after is a meal. But there are corals with champions which fiercely protect them from this thorny nemesis. Pinching and prodding, snipping at tube feet, this tiny crab is appropriately called the coral guard. It spends its entire life living within this coral fortress, feeding off the mucus produced by its host. This little David will not give up until the Goliath is defeated. The coral reef, a fascinating tangle of millions of lives, sometimes resolves into amazing spectacles of beauty and grace. But it's wonderful in its richness as well, one of the Earth's most productive communities. Although the reef is rich in fish, its craggy topography makes it difficult to harvest on a commercial scale. One method that's used, called the Muroami, supports every individual in this village. Nearly all the healthy males from age 7 to 70 will board the Muroami fishing vessel for a 10-month sojourn at sea. The fishermen load livestock, supplies, and personal belongings onto the ship. The stark, empty hull undergoes a fantastic transformation. As every square inch is filled, the ship becomes totally self-sufficient. More than 30 of these vessels ply the reefs surrounding the Philippines. Each carries a crew of as many as 500 people. The younger boys are the fishermen and the divers, while the older men mend the nets, cook the meals, and stow the catch. Their diet while on board is fish and corn grits. This provides sufficient protein, but the menu is a primary cause of the epidemic dysentery on board. With this mass of humanity compressed into close quarters, the living conditions are terrible. The boys sleep on cots stacked 4 high and often have just one change of clothes for all those months at sea. The maestro is in charge of the fishermen, and each morning he decides on the reef to be fished. The boys launch themselves as the mothership passes over the reef. At the same time, the support boats, called bancas, paddle into position at the opposite end of the reef, where the master divers lay the net. Designed like a large bag, it's secured to the bottom. The open end faces into a mild current. 2 panels are extended on each side and effectively guide the fish into the opening. Once the net is in place, the cordon of divers moves toward the net. As many as 250 buoys are dropped off at the fishing site during a single dive. Each of them is equipped with a line to which a rock is attached long enough to reach to the top of the reef. This is the scare line, their sole fishing equipment. White plastic strips are tied to the line and act as a visual wall, herding the fish. The maestro remains in one of the bancas and instructs the divers and the fishermen. Each operation takes about an hour, and the boys do as many as 10 dives a day. Pounding relentlessly, the boys herd the fish down the reef. It's the large rocks banged against the coral to scare the fish out of their hiding holes, which hurt the reef, damaging the more fragile coral heads. Literally everything living within the scare lines is herded into the net. Even some of the larger species, like this white-tipped shark, are trapped. Once the fish have been driven into the bagged net, timing becomes critical. The net must be pulled up before the fish can escape. But before this can happen, the side panels must be untied and the net disentangled from the coral reef. It takes a diver as long as 3 minutes underwater to complete his work. It is not unusual to see 10 to 15 boys working at depths of more than 80 feet. It is very risky. Once they've freed the net, there's only one way out. a small hole with white plastic lines attached as markers. The boys wait patiently to pass through the hole and return to the surface in the same calm and controlled manner they displayed on the swim down. This technique effectively reduces the fish population of a given reef for an extended period of time. So the Muro Army vessels are always seeking more productive grounds on untouched reefs far out in the South China Sea. Boys aged 7 to 15 are used because they eat less, drink less, demand less in terms of wages, and simply take up less space. Their youthful vitality and good cheer also helps them survive the hard life and horrendous living conditions. They work on a profit-sharing basis. Their annual wage is based on about 20% of the boat's income. The average boy makes about $350 during a season, which works out to be about $1 a day. Little as this seems, it's an average wage in the Philippines. The amount of fish which is taken each day varies. A good day can yield 16 tons. With more than 30 boats at sea, fishing for 10 months at a time, the technique proves very efficient. The fish are classified as to size and species. The more valuable are packed in ice for offloading at the major markets. The least desirable fish are salted and hung up on lines to dry. Although this destructive fishing technique has been illegal since 1986, there has been no enforcement of the ban. But even with the growth of high-yield, destructive fisheries, the price of fish in the marketplace is soaring. Fish provides half the protein in the Filipino diet, and with the population almost 5 times the size it was just 50 years ago, the supply cannot keep up with the enormous increase in demand. Half of all Filipinos live below the poverty level. Life in the cities, which depends on a cash income, can be a desperate endeavor for the poor. Instead, many turn to the reefs or the land for sustenance. But the reefs are dying, and the patterns of land use are only making the problem worse. The forests of the Philippines, once as diverse and as productive as its reefs, are being cut down. At least 2/3 have already been felled. Another 500,000 acres disappear each year. The forest acts as a living sponge, absorbing the torrential rains of the monsoon and preventing the precious soil from washing away. Once the forest has been cleared, there is no check on the seasonal deluge, which tears at the land, washing it into the sea. Logging, legal or otherwise, is a serious problem. But even more devastating is the human need for agricultural land. Slash and burn farming is the last resort for the growing numbers of hungry people. Today, they're moving up into the marginal hill country. The best land in the country has long been used to grow export crops, such as sugarcane and coconuts. Land reform is desperately needed. 90% of the land is in the hands of just 10% of the people. Scratching a life from the easily eroded hills is difficult. Irrigation is by the bucketful, and a pig is an item of luxury. And those who do own a farm find that land does not grow, but families do. With each generation, the family plot is divided into ever smaller parcels among the children. Most farmers don't own enough land to support their families and must hire out as seasonal laborers in order to buy their food. And those that abandon the land to seek their sustenance in the sea find that the problems of deforestation have followed them there. Bared of its forest cover, the land is washing away, and the dark stain of silt is the most deadly threat of all to the coral reefs. Shaded by its silty shroud from the light it needs to survive, its innumerable mouths choked by sediment, the coral dies. 70% of all the Philippine reefs have already been seriously damaged by siltation and destructive fishing. An irreplaceable heritage is slipping away, taking with it a host of benefits to humankind that we've only begun to understand. Drugs to help save human lives have been discovered in many marine invertebrates. From a nudibranch's rosette of eggs comes a powerful anti-cancer agent. From tunicates, also called sea squirts, comes a drug 10 times more effective than the one used today to stop the rejection of organ transplants. And from a sponge, a drug that may revolutionize the treatment of arthritis. And the search for useful chemicals from the reef has just begun. The beauty and wonder of the coral reef is also a major attraction for tourists to the Philippines. Set free from the confines of life on land, the diver floats into a magical realm of creatures as strange as they are splendid. But the benefits of tourism go beyond the great gift of awe afforded a lucky few who visit this enchanted world. Tourism generates almost 700 million sorely needed dollars for the Philippine economy each year. And although few tourists come just to dive, most find some way to enjoy the reefs. If properly controlled, tourism could be a major boon for reef conservation. Dive tourism provides a strong economic argument for the establishment of marine parks. More than 16 reef conservation areas have already been established. Unfortunately, few, if any, are properly maintained. The shortage of funds plagues all attempts at reef conservation. One program that is meeting with success is aimed at restoring the giant clam. Overfished for their valuable meat and shells, these animals disappeared from large areas of their range. Now they're raised in pens at a marine research station set up by the University of the Philippines. Students and researchers work under the guidance of Dr. Eduardo Gomez, one of the country's most active and effective conservationists. Once the clams have reached 3 inches in size, they're moved into control pens in the sea. They grow slowly and must be guarded against both predators and poachers. They will remain here in the security of the pens until they're 12 inches long. Only then are they placed out on the reef, their natural home, where they will be monitored for another year. The giant clam is the very first animal to be successfully returned to the reef. Not only is it being given another chance at survival here, it's being restored as a valuable resource for the Philippine people. With continued policing and a healthy reef, the clams should soon be able to repopulate themselves. Researchers are seeking other ways to take pressure off the reef. Fish farming, or aquaculture, shows great promise. Fish are bred in pens, much as we raise chickens or cattle. This is Laguna, the largest fish farming community in the country. Enrique Tomas has been given a new start. Not long ago, he fished the waters off Manila Bay, but as the reefs degenerated, he was unable to support his family. Today, he raises tilapia, a fish originally from Africa, but one especially well suited to aquaculture.
Makaluto ka na sa rin.
Maya-maya pa. Aga pa eh.
He lives with his family in a house raised above the farm so that they can keep an eye out for fish rustlers. Twice a month, with the help of his family and hired hands from the local village, he gathers up his harvest. Not only is he now supporting his own family, by employing others, the benefits of the fish farm are extended to the larger community. Aquaculture already supplies 10% of all the fish consumed in the Philippines, and it shows great potential for expansion. But despite these positive signs, the people of the Philippines find themselves at a difficult juncture. The pressure of their increasing numbers is undercutting the ability of their land and sea to support future generations. But there is hope. Under the full moon of spring, a parrotfish slumbers, enveloped in a mucus cocoon. A coronet fish slinks away to some sleeping place of its own. But for the hard corals, tonight is an occasion they have awaited for an entire year. Tonight, the corals will spawn. In some species, whole coral heads convulse, releasing clouds of sperm. For each species, the time of spawning is precisely set, down to the very hour. Soon the whole reef is engaged in a mass orgy of reproduction. Some corals release both sperm and eggs together, enclosed within the same bundle. Each coral polyp releases only one, which floats to the surface where wave action will break it apart. Some 120 different species of coral will participate in this synchronous celebration of renewal. The predictability and exact timing of this multi-species event is unparalleled in the animal world. Perhaps this incredible coordination helps swamp the predators that feed on this swarm of new life. Many eggs will survive to be fertilized and become tiny coral larvae. Coral larvae are not sedentary like the adults. Instead, they swim with the plankton for weeks or even months until they settle down to begin building that delicate masterwork of life, the coral reef. Incredibly, mass coral spawning has only just been discovered, although it has doubtless been taking place for millions of years. We know so few of the reef's secrets. Who could guess what other miracles it may conceal? For us, it's still a strange new world with creatures we barely recognize, let alone understand. We are fortunate to be the first generation ever to witness the beauty of this kingdom beneath the waves. It would be an unconscionable sorrow if we were also to be the last.
Nature is made possible by public television stations, your gas company, and the gas industry, whose respect for nature and the environment is reflected in the underwriting of this series. America's gas industry provides 160 million people with natural gas energy all across the country. James Shreve has written a companion book to the Nature series, Nature, the other Earthlings. It is available in bookstores and libraries.